Without peace, all of the dreams vanish and are reduced to ashes. Quoted by Jawaharlal Nehru. Good morning, everyone. Respected dignitaries, distinguished guests, esteemed faculty, and dear participants. I warmly welcome you all to the fourth plenary session on National Conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea, and Nation. As we step into the final day of this remarkable conference, we continue to explore the life and legacy of Jawaharlal Nehru, delving into his ideals of progressive, inclusive, and secular India. I warmly welcome and acknowledge the moderator for this session, Mr. Josie Joseph, Associate Professor, Department of English, SB College, whose expertise will guide us. Welcome, sir. And our esteemed resource person, Mr. Harsh Murthy. Welcome, sir. And I also welcome Mr. Ajoy Ashwat, sir, for your presence in the session. Welcome, sir. Today, we are privileged to have with us Mr. Harsh Murthy, former civil servant, renowned author, and founder of Karmali Mohabbat, an organization dedicated to fostering communal harmony and compassion in society. Mr. Harsh Murthy's prolific body of work includes acclaimed books such as Partitions of the Heart, Unmaking the Idea of India, Ash in the Belly, India's Unfinished Battle Against Hunger. These works reflect his deep engagement with social justice and human rights. The topic of his talk, Nehru and the Building of Indian Secularism, aligns perfectly with his vision and body of work. It is a subject of profound importance in today's time. Without further ado, I invite Mr. Josie Joseph to take the stage and moderate the session. Sir, please.
Honorable Chief Guest of the day, Harsh Murthy, respected teachers, you can see the Vice Principal here, your students, friends. Good morning and hearty greetings to you all. First up, I want to thank the organizers of this seminar, especially my friends Amit, David, and Ranjit, for giving me the honor of being part of this wonderful, wonderful occasion. I also want to congratulate all of you on thinking of a topic like this. To hold a seminar on Nehru in these days is actually unthinkable in many parts of the modified India that we are all living now. Nehru has become unfashionable, let alone unappealing to large sections of the population today because of this constant feeding of data, of falsified information from where. And the reason why some people love to hate Nehru is it's because of that man that India is still a secular democratic country. Even though both democracy and secularism have been considerably weakened in the last few years or so. And this whole talk of this Hindu Rashtra that we are confronted with, it's not something new, it's an idea that's at least a century old. But for the very first time in history, this has now become a possibility. It's the first 16 years of Nehru's administration that he put in place structures which would prevent India from dragging down to the kind of theocracy or theocratic state that we see in our neighborhood and many parts of the world. But that threat is real and looming at the moment. All the more reason that we talk about Nehru and such ideals as democracy and secularism. Now, coming to our main speaker of this plenary session, I can't think of a better person in India today to talk about Nehru and the idea of secularism. Because he's one person who has committed himself to the cause of secularism and of justice, of social justice, of ethics, and all of that. I've read one book that's Ash in the Belly, and it left me deeply disturbed. And I've also had the occasion of listening to him a few years ago when he came to the Kerala Literature Festival at Kozhikode. And again, that session really unsettled all of us in the audience. Mander is not the kind of writer who will entertain you. He's a kind of writer who will disturb you, unsettle you, and leave you feeling guilty. And guilty that you're some way complicit in what's happening around it. You're not doing enough. You're not resisting enough. You're not putting in whatever little you can do. And as was mentioned in the introduction earlier, he began his career as an IAS officer, and you know what those three letters mean to in India. The Indian Civil Service, the Indian Administrative Service, is the most sought after profession in the world. If you look at the number of candidates appearing for the preliminary, that's a world record, right? Nowhere else people write or attempt this in such numbers. And he was a brilliant officer, highly respected officer. And then Gujarat 2002 happened, and he resigned from his very lucrative or very powerful and most glamorous career that that anyone, any Indian youth would die for. He had more than a decade of service left at that time. And then he threw himself into this a very unpleasant world of social work and activism. And he traveled along the length and breadth of the country, mostly to riot-affected people. And when he described some of the experience, it's so chilling to just listen to what he witnessed. All those, the trauma of the victims of communal riots and he has written extensively. I think about 20 books. He travels frequently. He comes to Kerala for these festivals, Kerala in particular, and he tries to reach out to as many people as possible and to give this message of shaking us up from our comfort zone and to look at the larger picture, look at what is happening around us. That is not just a political question, it's also an ethical question, it's a moral question. I can go on like this, but I don't want to take any more time. So with these words of introduction, let me now invite our chief guest to take over and give his lecture, after which I look forward to a very meaningful interaction and discussion. And I want all of you to listen keenly to his lecture, take down notes, and frame your questions, and let's have a meaningful discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind, overly generous introduction. Thank you all for gathering here this morning and for inviting me here. As I was thinking about speaking to you about Nehru and his contribution to Indian secularism, I thought back to actually the journey I made just before I came here. Uh, the journey was to a place called Moradabad uh, in Uttar Pradesh, and uh, and I made the journey to the home of a young man who had been lynched by a crowd. Uh, is the sound okay? I speak a little softly, so maybe that's a problem. Is it all right now? Yeah. Okay. So I was saying that I was thinking about the journey I had made uh, just before this, a few days ago, to a place called Moradabad. I went to the home of a middle-aged man who crowd had gathered and they very cruelly had beaten him to death, claiming that he had slaughtered a cow. Uh, Most of these lynchings actually in recent years are characterized also uh, by the videotaping of the lynching by the perpetrators. So it's a kind of it's a performative act of collective violence, of hate. Not very different from what America saw for 60 years in the lynching of African Americans, which were also acts of performance of hate. Uh, their crowds used to gather almost like a picnic and used to see this person being lynched to death. Today, instead of crowds gathering, you have the video camera and it is then circulated widely uh, and consumed by millions, communicating hate uh, and communicating fear. Uh, in the Karwani Mohabbat, of which we had felt, Karwani Mohabbat literally means a caravan of love. And the rising hate that we've seen in recent years, over the past decade, uh, the greatest symbol of it is, on one hand, runaway, almost genocidal hate speech, and on the other, it is these acts of lynching. Uh, and we had resolved that we have to respond. And learning from Gandhi, you learn that you cannot fight hate with more hate. Just as you cannot fight darkness by bringing in more darkness. You have to fight darkness, uh, even if like a storm, uh, but you have to still light a candle to fight the darkness. And so this caravan of love was an attempt to reach out. We resolved that we go to the home of every person who has been lynched to say that you're not alone, that there are people who care, and that we seek forgiveness for what we've become as a people, that we pledge to be with you, whatever happens, as you fight for justice and you pick up the broken pieces of your life, and we will tell you a story. So it was in this, I, I thought we would, in 2017, when I first made the call, I thought we'd make one journey. But the journeys have continued because the hate violence has only grown. This must have been about the 50th journey that I have made. And each time I do this, I think about where India country that I was born in and love, how much we have lost our way. We go back to the days of the freedom struggle, and we call that India's struggle for freedom led by Mahatma Gandhi was never just a struggle, uh, a battle against British colonialism. It was also always a battle about what kind of country we would build after the British colonizers left. And central uh, to that idea was that we would build a country where it would not matter which god you worship or if you worship no god. It would not matter what your caste, your language, your religion, your gender, uh, your wealth, whatever, you are fully an equal citizen in every way into this land. Uh, it's what we call secularism. And the Indian idea of secularism, I explain that a little more, is somewhat distinct from the way uh, the word secularism is understood in the West. But when India approached freedom, um, the question arose who would lead India, who would lead free India. And it is well known that Mahatma Gandhi chose Jawaharlal Nehru as his successor. At some level, they were very close. Nehru looked upon Gandhi like he would look upon to a father. But they were very different people at some level. Gandhiji was a practicing, deeply devout Hindu. Nehru was an agnostic, rationalist. He was opposed to religious ritual and superstition. His great stress was on the scientific temper. And instead of religion, the ethics of religion, he was guided by the ethics of what one could call humanism and science. So at one level, it looked like a contradiction for Gandhiji to have chosen somebody at some level very different from him in their beliefs. But actually, there was no contradiction. Gandhiji, I think, was very clear that the building of Indian secularism and the protection of the rights of minorities would be India's greatest challenge after freedom, in the circumstances that we became free. And that this task would be, it was safest to place this responsibility on the shoulders of Jawaharlal Nehru. Let us go back to those times, and all of you are very young. I also wasn't born until I think 8 years after India became free. But it was a time, firstly, globally, the shadow of the Second World War and of the Holocaust, in which, led by Hitler, 6 million Jews were slaughtered with great cruelty. Two-thirds of the entire Jewish population of Europe was eliminated, killed, men, women, children, with great cruelty. Other minorities were also slaughtered, disabled people, homosexual men, Roma and Sinti who nomadic people. So the experience of Nazi Germany was a crucial reminder that democracy is never just uh, the will of the majority. Democracy is equally uh, measured by the protection of every minority. So I think there was that learning at the time that we imagined and built our free nation. But it was also the time of partition. And partition happened. Uh, the, this idea, this idea that India would be a country where people of every religion, identity, caste, gender would have equal rights and equal belonging was a very was uh, under the leadership of Gandhi and then Nehru. It was clear that the majority of Indians, Hindu, Muslims, Sikh, Christian, shared this imagination, this ideal, but not all Indians. And the bullets that were pumped into Mahatma Gandhi's chest during a prayer meeting on 30th January 1948 were were a reminder that not all Indians shared this imagination and this belief. The RSS was constituted exactly 100 years ago in 1925. And they believed that India was a country in which belonged to its Hindu majority. And in this country, uh, religious minorities, but particularly Muslims and Christians, do, would not belong as equal citizens. Uh, they, uh, they had a very clear notion of second-class citizenship. And in the writings, it's important to, in the writings of the early founders of the RSS, there was open admiration for Hitler and for his approach to solve the Jewish problem, which they wish to emulate in this country. Um, Partition happened, the Muslim League also maintained that India was not one country but two countries, a Hindu India and a Muslim Pakistan. The idea of Pakistan and the idea of India, um, we often use these terms. What was the idea of Pakistan? The idea of Pakistan is basically that a person, we have many identities. All of us, if I ask you, what is your identity? So each of you would have different things. You'd say, I'm a woman, I'm a young person, I'm Malayali, I love literature, I'm Christian, and so on and so forth. So we have multiple identities. Uh, communal ideology, what it does is it erases all other identities and privileges only one. So firstly, you're defined only and exclusively by your religious identity. So a communal ideology begins with the idea that you're defined by your religious identity, and uh, people of one religious identity have a set of common interests that are different from people of other religious identities, and in fact are in conflict. So there's something like Muslim interests, Hindu interests, Christian interests, and these interests are in conflict. So the Muslim League and the RSS and uh, Hindutva and the Muslim League uh, had this belief where they privileged your religious identity and excluded other identities, erased other identities, and then spoke about interests of your religious identity being in conflict with the other. So the Muslim League said that Muslims cannot get equality, security, and development except in a country of Muslims. So, in simple words, the idea of Pakistan is that you're safe only in your samenesses. And sameness is defined primarily by your religious identity. What was the idea of India in contrast to this? The idea of India, the idea of India, which we can call the idea of Indian secularism, the idea of India was that no, you're not safe seeking samenesses. You're safe only if you respect difference. That there are many paths to lead a good life or to the Almighty if you are religious. And each of them are valid and legitimate. And it is only by not seeking that we should all be the same, but by respecting everyone's different paths and beliefs, that we can stay together. To me, if I think about who would represent to me the quintessential Indian, uh, would be a young woman who comes out of, say, a slum. She walks down the road, she sees a mosque and she bows her head. She sees a church and she bows her head. She sees a gurdwara and she bows her head. She sees a temple and she bows her head. Actually, I travel around the world. There is no other civilizational tradition where this happens. There are many problems with India's civilizational traditions, caste and gender, violence and cruelty in an extreme way. But if there's one thing fine in our civilization, the finest is this idea of equal respect. And that is what we call, I mean, if I'm asked to define Indian secularism, it is this idea that the idea of equal respect for all faiths and beliefs, include all religious faith, including the absence of it. So all of them are legitimate. Uh, Secondly, it's the idea of equal belonging uh, uh, and equal rights. So I spent some months in Germany trying to understand what happened in Nazi Germany. And I see how, as a people, they try to struggle with, acknowledge and struggle with the cruelty of that past. But I saw that even in a country like Germany, when immigrants come in, uh, they have a very clear idea that if you want to belong to this country, you have to respect the majority religion and culture and language. You must learn German, you must accept a certain way of life and so on. Germany today, almost 25% of its population now is of immigrant backgrounds. A large majority of them are Muslim. But I would ask even progressive German friends, is Islam part of the German nation? And they would, almost fall off their chairs in consternation. But in the idea of India, of course, Islam, Christianity, Sikh faith, the many agnostic, skeptical traditions, the many the Christian faith, and all of these, all of their divisions, but also indigenous faiths, tribal belief systems, all of them belong and belong equally. So to be an Indian, the secular idea of belonging in India is the idea that I am free to be myself. There are no conditionalities. I don't have to learn a language. I don't have to follow a particular way of life. I don't have to respect or subordinate myself. That this is the majority established religion or culture or way of life, and I must be like them. Or that is not a condition in the secular idea. I spent my early childhood in what is now Arunachal Pradesh. I'll speak about that later. But there are communities in Arunachal where just 200 people speak a particular language and have a particular way of life. To me, the secular idea of India is that those 200 people living their life in the way that they choose, with speaking the language that they choose, not only belong to India, but belong equally to India with no conditionality. So it's equal respect for every faith and equal belonging without conditionalities. That defines and this derived from our freedom struggle. It derived from the ideas in the Indian Constitution, but it also derives from a much older civilization history. And it is in defense of this idea of India that Nehru stood so tall. Um, Also going back, during partition from 1946 onwards, India tore apart with a violence that the southern part of India saw very little of it. But North India, both the western flanks of Punjab and the eastern flanks of Bengal, so violence of a brutality where where you a million people slaughtered each other, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh. Entire villages were, everyone was locked into a barn and set on fire. Entire communities were killed with, using agricultural implements. Train loads, uh, trains were coming filled only with corpses in this direction and in that direction. Um, 12 to 15 million people lost their homes. It was the largest upheaval of human history, largest forced displacement in human history, except the movement of Africans as slaves to the Americas. So think of that time of trauma. Think of a time when a different country had been constituted on the basis of religion. My own family belonged to what is now Pakistan, and I have grown up hearing the most terrifying stories of the violence that occurred at that time. We came in with great loss, a sense of loss and anger, anguish into what is now India. The refugee camps were full of people who had lost their home, lost their loved ones, and women were abducted in large numbers. So it is in that moment that the future of India was being decided. And there were large numbers of people who felt that uh, they have got their Pakistan. So the country that, the divided India that we have now must be a country for its Hindu population. And I think it was our great fortune that we were led by people like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, who resolved that India would not be a mirror image of Pakistan. We would be a country where, as I said, it would not matter which God you worship or if you worship no God. You would be a fully equal citizen of this country. I'll say one more word about the Indian idea of secularism, and and then we'll go on to how Nehru contributed so valuably to this. Um, in France, secularism would, their commitment to secularism would require that if a young woman wanted to wear a hijab, she would be discouraged or prohibited from wearing a hijab in this scenario. The Indian idea of secularism would be to defend her right to wear the hijab. So we use the same term, but we mean very, very different things. And I think that this recognition of what we mean when we talk about secularism is the defense of your freedom to follow your way of life, and my freedom to follow mine. So there's a certain unconditionality of belonging, which is at the heart of the secular idea. But when I say there are no conditions to belonging in India, I'm not really, I'm not telling the full truth. There's one condition to belong to this country. And that condition is not to respect the traditions or values of what we call the Hindu faith, which is actually upper caste Hinduism. So respect for the culture and traditions of upper caste Hinduism is not the condition that we must follow in secular India. But there is a condition. What is that condition? Any of the students would like to. What is the condition? What are the conditions, or what is the condition for you to belong to this country?
Respect for all the religions.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's the secular idea, including the absence of faith.
Including the lack of
Yeah.
faith or lack of religion. That's all.
And yes, but why? And okay, this was enunciated very beautifully by two judges, Justice A.P. Shah and Justice Murli, when they in the Delhi High Court, when they passed a ruling on the question of the rights of sexual minorities, the decriminalization of homosexuality. So we still had the colonial legal provisions which made homosexuality into a crime. It was an interesting moment because when we used to have, still have those TV debates. I have stopped watching them for a long time, but where you have those 6 boxes of people and everybody screaming at everybody else and disagreeing, etc. This was the one time when those 6 boxes were filled with men, all men, who agreed with each other. So the discussion was on whether 377 should be abolished and homosexuality should be decriminalized. There were representatives of every major religion And this is the one time they all agreed that homosexuality should not be decriminalized. That our understanding of our respective religions does not permit homosexuality, and therefore, so I was saying this is the only time I've seen them all come together united. I wish they get together for peace or for abolishing hunger or whatever, but this was the only thing that time I saw them all together. But what did the judges say? The judges said the Constitution guarantees your right and freedom to follow your personal beliefs and faiths. But there's one condition, and that condition is that if there's a conflict between your beliefs and constitutional morality, then constitutional morality will prevail. So the one condition to belonging in this country is not to follow or respect the majority tradition, way of life, culture, belief, as it is articulated. The Hindu faith is complicated because who can define what is, there isn't one book and one set of beliefs, but whatever. Uh, but there's no such conditionality. The conditionality is only that we accept the higher morality or the highest morality of the Constitution. So my religious belief tells me that there should be castes and there should be untouchables. That contradicts constitutional morality. And therefore, you don't have this freedom. So we have freedoms to be ourselves within the four walls of constitutional morality. That is my understanding of Indian secularism, which Jawaharlal Nehru, at the time when India was being torn apart uh, by the horrors of partition violence, at a time when millions of people lost their homes and country forever, at a time when, in the shadow of the Holocaust and the horrors of what it demonstrated, at that time, India chose to be, we the people of India chose to be a country where people of every faith and belief, caste and identity, religion and language and gender and class and ethnicity would all be equal citizens with equal rights, equal freedoms within the four walls of constitutional morality. Okay. So there are stories, and I'll tell you a few of them. There were, during the riots of that preceded and followed India's freedom. Nehru was there. We heard about the Noakhali slaughter, very large scale slaughter of Hindus in Noakhali, and which was followed by equally devastating slaughter of Muslims in Bihar. So Gandhiji went and spent actually many months in Noakhali trying to bring peace. Nehru went to Bihar, uh, and he went from place to place. He went to Aligarh, which had again seen major riots. He found there something that we see now again and again. Hindu shops and establishments actually had slogans and flags which distinguished them from the Muslims. And Nehru was devastated by what he saw. He upbraided the crowds who came to see the future Prime Minister. Is this a picture of Swaraj for which? Is this the picture of Swaraj for which you have been fighting? He asked. Is this the kind of country you want to build up? Among other stories, where riots happen, Nehru would leap into the middle of the crowd with just his baton, separating people, forcing, appealing, persuading them to stop fighting. Another story is told that in Delhi, he was, as Prime Minister, he was going down the road and he saw a Hindu man pushing a handcart full of goods which he had looted from a Muslim neighborhood. And Nehruji jumps out of his official car, he's the Prime Minister. He goes and he fights with him, he scolds him. At some point, even because he was a hot-tempered person, he even caught him by the throat when he refused to return. Another story is told, and I'll read this out from an account. When Nehru went to meet refugees clustered in the pilgrimage town of Haridwar, he tried to be conciliatory and to talk to them of human losses on both sides of the border. And we must always remember that when we say 1 million people died, Hindus and Sikhs on one hand and Muslims died in more or less equal numbers, in more or less similar circumstances of cruelty and violence. So we have this partial remembering. In India, we only remember what happened to us, and I'm sure in Pakistan they do the same. And as an aside, especially after 2002, when I quit the IAS in protest against the violence, my life almost became like a BC and an AD from 2002. I lost almost 75% or so of all my relationships, of my extended family, of people I grew up with, people, my friends in the IAS, friends in school, college. They just cancelled me out of their lives. And so typically, people of my extended family would come and say, because there was intense cruelty and violence that happened in my parents' village. And they would say, Harsh, we are ashamed of you. Why are you ashamed of me? After all that we have suffered in partition, you've gone and taken the wrong side. So what should be my answer to them? When my extended family tells me that after all that we suffered in partition, I'm standing with Muslims who are suffering hate violence today. So I've gone and taken the wrong side. So my answer to them was that after all that we suffered in partition, who better than us can understand what it means to be targeted with hate, with violence, with fear, only because of your religious identity? So it is I who am on the right side. It's you who are on the wrong side, don't you see? And for that reason, I mean, when I read accounts of Nehru before and after the partition riots, he would keep reminding people of human losses on both sides of the border, in both sets of community. Some young people whose parents had been butchered, he had gone to a refugee camp. Some young people whose parents had been butchered and whose sisters and daughters had been left in Pakistan surrounded Nehruji. One young man lost his temper and gave Nehruji a resounding slap, a slap on the face of the Prime Minister of India. But Panditji said nothing to him. He just placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. The young man shouted, "Give my mother back to me. Bring my sisters back to me." Panditji's eyes filled up with tears. He said, Your anger is justified, but be it in Pakistan or be it in India, the calamity that has overtaken us all is the same. We have both to pass through. Think also of a time when these millions of, literally millions of refugees displaced forever from their homelands had come. India's resolution of and resettlement of the refugees in those early years was an extraordinary accomplishment, uh, where once again Nehru was at the leadership. But the challenges remain of safeguarding secularism in post-independence India. There was, of course, the shadow of partition riots, a country riven by religious caste, language, and class divides. Mahatma Gandhi's assassination by a Hindu bigot. Nehru said at that time, we seem to be living on top of a volcano, and any kind of spark can light up a conflagration. But we cannot run away from the task that history has set for us. He said the real task was to build a united India through what he called the psychological integration of all Indian people. It was a difficult time because of the huge public anger of partition, of literally millions of people who lost their homes and homelands. There was also the wide penetration of the Hindu right within the Congress, which also Nehru had to confront. Remember, even Rajendra Prasad, who was the first Indian president, he wanted, among other things, he wanted a full ban on cow slaughter, and he opposed reforms in the Hindu personal law. In October 1949, the All India Congress Committee passed a resolution at a time when Nehru was abroad for RSS members to be admitted as primary members of the Congress. And Nehru had to come back and reverse this. The question of the rebuilding of Somnath, in which again Rajendra Prasad played a central role. The question of cow slaughter and cow slaughter planning. It's interesting that during the writing of the constitution, there was a significant section of people, not just from the Hindu Mahasabha, RSS, but also from within the Congress, who wanted the inclusion of cow slaughter, the ban on cow slaughter in the fundamental rights. And, and they try to explain these are fundamental rights of human beings. But there was a very strong demand. And at some point, both Nehru and Ambedkar said that they would resign if this was introduced. But it finally a compromise was reached, and banning cow slaughter is actually part of our constitution, but in the directive principles. But if you read the language of that section, it's very interesting. They say promoting whatever the banning of cow slaughter, but very carefully not saying that we're doing it because to respect the sentiments of Hindus, because that would be a compromise with religion. So they wrote, in order to promote scientific animal husbandry or some such sort of very vague term, but in a sense, they finally introduced the question of cow slaughter, but still resisting the premise that we should do this because the Hindu majority does not worships the cow. Nehru was very clear about the place of religion in public life. The state must be delinked from religious considerations. The army, police, judiciary, civil administration must be freed completely from religious considerations. Post-independence, Nehru continued stressing long central principle that India is the land for all Indians. He wrote many letters to chief ministers every, I think, fortnight or every month. He wrote to the chief ministers, we have a Muslim majority who are so large in numbers that they cannot, even if they want to, go anywhere else. He urged that they must be given the same rights as other citizens, treated in a civilized manner, and that this is essential if the nature of the body politic itself was to be preserved. The refugees. If I came as a refugee from West Pakistan or East Bengal, East Pakistan, the only way I could get uh, a home or a property was if Muslims left. So I had a vested interest in driving Muslims away. Uh, Gandhiji's last fast, and I'd like us to remember this was 2 weeks before he died. He was assassinated. He'd come to Delhi and he was witnessing this unending hate and violence and the refugee camps filling up with people who had come from West Pakistan. They would then have an interest in driving out Muslims from their areas, and you would get a home. They also, the anger was so much that the churches, the mosque in Jam Masjid, for instance, the Dargah in Mehroli in Delhi, in all of these they put uh, Hindu idols. And they said, from now on, no mosques will be allowed, no dargahs will be allowed as places of worship. So Gandhi's last fast had three demands. This was just 2 weeks before he was assassinated. Public anger against Indian Muslims was at its peak. His three demands. The first, I think many of us know, the first demand was that there was a certain share of the treasury that Pakistan was to be given. If we had not given it to Pakistan, Pakistan would have become bankrupt. And Gandhi's first demand was that brothers fight and separate, but they still remain brothers, and we must give Pakistan its due. But the other two demands were very significant. The second demand was that we must return the mosques and the dargahs with full respect to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Gandhi said something very significant. He said that no true place of worship can be built on hatred and disrespect of another religion. Which is why I'm very clear that this grand structure that is being built in Ayodhya, Gandhiji would never have accepted it as God. So that was his second demand. And his third demand was that, and Irfan Habib, the historian, writes about this, and he spoke to me also about it. He said that I was just 19 years old at that time. So I was witness to it. And there was so much fear among us as Muslims. And the actions of both Gandhi and Nehru at that time gave us so much solace. His third demand was that if Gandhi's third demand was that if Muslims uh, have got displaced and are in camps waiting for transportation to Pakistan, go to them and say, no, this is your country. come back to your home. And Irfan Nabil was saying, just think of even the moral, the courage to make that demand. I belong to Pakistan. I was in Pakistan. I have been uprooted from my homeland amid state violence. I've lost my loved ones. I've lost my home, my country. I come here and I finally got a home. And you're saying, leave that home, give it back to its original Muslim owner, and you go back to the refugee camp. See, it was to the young people here, I just want to remind us of the moral clarity and courage of that time. The first day, there were 10,000 people on the streets of Delhi in support of these demands. By the fifth day, they said there were 1 lakh people supporting these demands. All of these demands were accepted. Hindu Mahasabha RSS had to sign an undertaking returning the places of worship. Nehru and Gandhi over and over again went to Muslims and saying, to say, this is your country, equally your country, stay back, don't go to Pakistan. And millions of Muslims believed and heard their plea and chose to stay back. An argument that repeatedly used to come up was, look at what Pakistan is doing to its minorities. So we should also take revenge and do the same. But Nehruji would repeatedly tell his ministers, write to the chief minister, whatever happens in Pakistan, quite clearly our task in India is clear. We must pursue with even greater determination than in our past efforts to form a secular state, which means all communities can walk with their heads high. Also, the question of Christian conversions. In another letter to uh, uh, to the chief ministers, I think in 1954, Nehru addresses the prevalent fear of conversion by Christian missionaries. He said that the threat, inverted commas, uh, of missionaries converting populations to Christianity was grossly exaggerated. He said that even during British rule, missionaries had had limited success. He also expressed concern with people's reactions to missionaries, stating, this is no sign of tolerance, or if I may say with great respect, of any high culture to get excited over such matters. It is not the foreigner who will injure us as much as by our own actions and intolerance. Even Hinduism, which has not been a proselytizing religion, has now developed certain aggressive ways which convert and deconvert. One hears of the Shuddhi movement and of all its effects. He was anguished by the decline of the Urdu language, by the small presence of Muslims in public life. These were all issues to which he engaged in. A little last word about the Northeast. He was very, this idea of that they must assimilate, the tribal communities of the Northeast must assimilate. He was very strongly opposed to it. He said, why should they assimilate? They should have the freedom and the protection to be themselves. The frontier areas, which are now called Arunachal, at that time it was called the Northeast Frontier Agency, had actually not been opened up at all. There were no roads, there was no access. And Nehru decided to create a special team, which he personally handpicked from different services, and they constituted what was called then the Indian Frontier Administrative Service, later got integrated into the Indian Administrative Service. My father was privileged to be one of those who were identified, and he was part of the Indian Frontier Administrative Service. And he used to describe how there was an anthropologist and a close friend of Nehruji called Elvin, British anthropologist. So it was Nehru and very relevant, who would guide these officers on a day-to-day basis about how they should deal with these tribal populations in these unreached areas. And those letters still exist. My father would had many personal stories to talk about working with Nehru. He said he was just quite an extraordinary leader. And there was like my father would be a deputy secretary sitting in his office, and suddenly Nehru would walk in with the file and say, no, ye tha aise karte hain, would just walk out. And it just reminds you of another time which almost is like a dream. Uh, Somewhat irrelevantly, let me end with another little story, which just reminds us of another time. Uh, so, Nehruji's official residence, and bordering it were other officers who were, but there were no tall boundaries. So these two little children, and they were telling me about the story decades later. Standing, Nehruji's helicopter lands, and these two little boys in a helicopter and wide eyes. So they're looking at it. So Nehruji is walking towards the helicopter. He sees these two little boys. He goes to them and says, would you like to go in the helicopter? Yes, we'd love to go in the helicopter. He takes them by their fingers, both sides, and puts them into his helicopter, takes off, lands at the Parliament airport. He gets off, then he has to send these children home. So the Prime Minister walks out, finds an auto rickshaw on the road, gives him money, pays the fare, asks him to send the children, uh, take the children back home. It's a little story, probably irrelevant to the subject, but it's just who are we talking about? I think Ajoy also spoke about Nehru, the human being. And I thought I leave you also with this image. I was born 8 years after independence. My early childhood, fortunately, was at a time when Nehru was still leading our country. But I remember a childhood of great idealism. I remember a childhood, we were a partition family, but I never heard any voice of bigotry. Never. I never heard it from my classmates. I never heard it uh, from our films, from our public discussions, from our family. Um, I'm born in a Sikh family, and we have a prayer room, had a prayer room at our home, uh, as long as my parents were alive. So there was the Sikh Granth Sahib, the holy book. As a child, I think I was 9 or 10, I told my parents, this prayer room looks incomplete to me. We must have symbols of all faiths. So I went out and got an Allah, I got a cross, I got some of the Hindu gods and put them on the wall. And my parents did not for a moment flinch until my father died at 92. That was what our prayer room looked like. That was the secularism that the first generation of Indians before and after independence learned. And I think we learned a lot of it from the practice, the example, and the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure you all sitting here in this hall must have been enlightened as well as provoked by what he said. Now, the floor is open for discussion. You can have questions or responses. Please identify yourself and keep your question as short and as possible. Can we have a microphone for the audience, please?
Please feel free to sort of ask anything you agree, disagree, or have other thoughts or questions. Because as you would have noticed, I was talking about Nehru and his times, but I was actually talking about our times today. The questions that he had tried to confront and the pathways he showed, we have reached at a very different juncture in the India of today. So if there's anything you want to ask, please feel free.
I think I will start off. The moderator has a question. So this audience is very young. They probably have no idea of what it is to be in the Nehruvian India or the Nehruvian idealism you talk about. Those values you inherited from your parents or that generation. For them, Nehru is somebody who is responsible for, say, India's poverty, India's, all the faults that this is the kind of propaganda that they are fed with constantly. And then there is also the realities of the world. You know, the majoritarian impulse has always been here, it's everywhere, and there were these bigots. But it's a kind of acceptance they get right now is what bothers us. This is not just in the case of India. You see what's happening in America at the moment. We and the president and some of the statements he makes, it's unbelievable that somebody could make these statements in 2025. But what is worrying is the acceptance that the majority. How do you respond to that?
Should I keep sitting or would you like me to stand? Yeah. See, I think the problem is neither Trump nor Modi. It is us. And we have to recognize that the problem lies with us. I remember when we got Trump's election results. I have a young intern who works with me. He studies in Harvard. He's come to spend a year with us. He's of Indian origin. And I told him, I said, when the results came out, I said, Sahej is his name. I said, Sahej, what's happened to the people of your country? So he said, exactly what has happened to the people of your country. So I said, okay, yes, absolutely. Something is happening around the world. We're seeing more and more people choosing leaders, country after country after country. Leaders who are teaching us to hate. Leaders who are characterized by 3 or 4 or 5 things. Whether it's a Trump or a Modi or a Bolsonaro or Wilders or Le Pen or so many others. We're seeing in country, the neo-Nazi party, AFT, is now the second most popular party in Germany. And Germany is one country where they've really done a lot to try to fight this. I mean, right from nursery school, they start telling children how important it is to respect diversity and so on. Every child growing up in Germany has to visit concentration camps, has to understand what they did in their history. Yet, even in Germany now, the second largest party is the far right. So all of these leaders, in some way, who could be more different between, say, Donald Trump and Narendra Modi. One comes from somewhat humble background. One is, of course, a super rich multi-billionaire. One had never stayed with his one wife. One has gone through many women, and there's so many differences, and yet they're extremely similar. Firstly, this this hatred. I mean, this just I mean to say that that America is facing problems because of some immigrants who come across from the border uh, from Mexico and who eat cats and dogs. You know, some really absurd kind of thing. And here our Prime Minister is telling us that Muslims are going to, I mean, take away our buffaloes and our Mangal Sutras and also, so, you know, really bizarre kind of hate mongering is one thing that characterizes right-wing leaders across. But there's also other things. They have no respect for democratic processes. They are extremely close to very rich big business. The three men who were represented, who were sitting right in the front in Donald Trump's swearing in, own more wealth than half the population of the US. Uh, America has never been more unequal than it is today. India has never been more unequal, even in colonial times. So that's another feature of these times. There is also, I would like to say, the crassness of public discourse. I mean, just the idea, if anyone opposes you, the way you trash the person rather than deal with the opposition. That's again something that we see common. And lastly, I would underline a spectacular absence of public compassion. You don't show any compassion. We had 30 million people walking the streets during the pandemic. We had people dying across the country. I never saw public compassion. Shut down the whole economy. Where would people eat for the next day? Now, one of my books I wrote, I've called it Burning Pyres, Mass Graves, and a State That Failed Its People. So all of this is characterizing, and that is happening in country after country. There has to be a larger explanation. But again, I'm saying I don't. My problem is not Mr. Modi or Donald Trump. My problem is ordinary people. Why are more and more people? And Modi in the 2024 elections actually exposed brazenly his hate agenda. It was completely there, as clear as crystal. Likewise, Donald Trump, I mean, what he's been speaking about in the months leading up to the election, people are choosing him. When I studied Nazi Germany, a big lesson that I learned is that the horror of Nazi Germany was not Hitler. The horror of Nazi Germany was ordinary people. The extent to which, I mean, you could not have had a Holocaust where 6 million people were slaughtered. It wasn't even soldiers who were killing, because soldiers were out fighting the World War. It was civilians. Civilians in very large numbers. You know, when you read the accounts, how an entire society can get so brutalized. The time between Hitler's election, please remember Hitler was elected, and ironically with 33% vote share, very similar to 2014. And he would not have come to power if the left and the center had come together, and so on. I mean, between his election in 1933 and his defeat and suicide in 1945 was just 12 years. In 12 years, how can a country that prided itself to be the most civilized country at least in Europe, they claim in the world. They had more Nobel Prizes, composers, writers, scientists, Sigmund Freud. Interestingly, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Karl Marx were not just German but Jewish Germans, and so on. So, how a country can get so brutalized in such a short time? I am witnessing a similar brutalization of the Indian people, particularly the radicalization of the Hindu heart and mind. Sadly, also a lot of the Christian community are being drawn into uh, this hate. So I think we have to understand and fight it. Uh, these leaders are not coming, behind cannons and machine guns. These are not military coups, dictators. These are leaders we are choosing. Why are we choosing them? There's something profound, there's a profound crisis, an ethical and political crisis that I see, uh, that humankind is sort of facing. Uh, and it's a long conversation about what the nature of the crisis, why it is. But I think I'm just acknowledging that what we're witnessing today is an extraordinary moment. What's happening in Gaza and Israel? What is the role of Western democracies in defending a genocide that is unfolding? Many of these are questions that we have to.
Thank you so much. I was just reminded of Hannah Arendt's famous expression, the banality of evil. We talked about what happened in Germany. Yes, Hari sir.
Sir, you spoke about the word compassion. So I know it's a cliche to say that the personal is political and the political is personal. But when you discuss Nehru and Gandhi, these tropes of compassion, warmth, relationships, all these tropes, plenty of anecdotes. Do you think that such things are not there in our present polity? You take, I'm not saying things personal, but take the present Prime Minister. Can you think of such anecdotes where you have these tropes of reason and warmth and emotion, empathy? Don't you think they should come back to our polity?
Yeah, I actually, I might be biased, but I cannot recall, uh, an incident of spontaneous kindness. And I worked since 2002. I worked a lot in Gujarat, and that's why I say a spectacular absence of public compassion is what I observe, and and also this justification of like the Gujarat riots. The claim that it was a group of Muslim terrorists who set fire to the train, therefore, what follows is justified. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction is something that the Prime Minister said, then Chief Minister. What did Gandhiji say? Let me, Gandhiji, and again for our young people, where was Gandhiji when India got her freedom? Nehruji made that beautiful speech about tryst with destiny. Uh, when all the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom uh, at the stroke of the midnight hour and so on. Where was Gandhiji at that time? Any of you? No, he was in Calcutta. But Calcutta, after Noakhali, Calcutta was seeing, unending violence. And Gandhiji went there, tried to, like he had done in Noakhali, he wanted to bring peace. And finally, he went on a fast and said, I will not eat uh, until the last hand that is raised in violence is not lowered. And people say it was like a miracle. It was unimaginable. Housewives would say, how can my light the fire, Bapu is hungry, and so on. It just took 5 days and total peace was restored. Lord Mountbatten said that what my 55,000 armed soldiers could not do in Punjab, this one old man with his resolve and so on. But just the difference in discourse. One, a story is told of a Hindu man who comes very angry. Of course, there used to be no security, etc. He stormed and he told Gandhi, what you're doing is so wrong. Don't you understand my anger? Don't you understand my pain? I have a little boy this small who was killed by Muslim mobs. How can I overcome my pain? How can I overcome my anger? And what does Gandhiji reply? He says, I understand your pain and anger, but I'll tell you a way. Find a little boy, this small, a Muslim boy, whose parents have been killed by Hindu mobs. Adopt the child to be your son. Raise him in his own faith. Maybe then you will find ways to overcome your pain and anger. Where do we hear any leader telling us something remotely like this? Yeah, and certainly not the leadership we have in our country.
Yes, students will say somebody.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question is, how dangerous is the deep state funding, which especially aids anti-national activities in our country for the very foundation of secularism, especially after controversial figures like George Soros are kind of alleged to have some hideous activities in Kashmir, and our respected FM S. Jaishankar Prasad had called out him as old, rich, and dangerous.
George Soros, why do you say he's dangerous? What do you know about him?
He is known for funding almost in every neighboring countries around India for having some kind of anarchy. He is known for that.
What is your evidence for this?
I am just a postgraduate student. My limited.
This is your evidence. This.
Yes, of course.
WhatsApp.
No, not WhatsApp University.
Where have you got this evidence? It's just interesting. I'm not. I'm seeking. How do we understand issues? The story about George Soros is actually very interesting. Please sit. George Soros. Every authoritarian leader around the world has. They put up George Soros as the kind of enemy figure. Who is George Soros? George Soros is a person who got very rich with hedge funds, but he does the largest funding around the world, from compared to any philanthropist, for what he calls open society, for promoting democracy, for promoting human rights. He in Davos made a very extensive speech about the dangers to democracy of Mr. Modi. Since then, the Indian BJP IT cell have constructed him as some kind of devil, some kind of enemy who does all sorts of subversive activities. My request only to the young woman there is just independently understand the work, just look at the work that George Soros does and has funded and supported. don't, I mean, if the IT cell persuades you is that he's some kind of devil who's promoting anti-national activities, what is anti-national? I'm considered very anti-national. The speech I gave you just now was like profoundly anti-national. I'm being charged under the UAPA. I'm being charged under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. I have a range of crimes uh, charged against me. Uh, Search on the internet, and you'll find from the right wing, you'll find my descriptions of me exactly of the kind that you spoke about George Soros, including my close relations with him, as if I wake up every morning and take instructions from him. Then I have my bed tea, then I have breakfast, I take instructions from Sonia Gandhi, and then I spend the rest of the day trying to do this. George Soros and I have joined hands to convert India to Christianity. As it happens, George Soros is Jewish. I'm Sikh, but I don't know why we are converting India to Christianity. But that's what you'll find. Uh, what are the other things? Yeah, for instance, they'll say that uh, when the anti-CA protests were going on, uh, if you recall, the police force had entered into the libraries uh, of Jamia. The students were very devastated, and they beat up the students. There was huge anguish. So the next morning, I had gone to Jamia. People said I must speak to the students. There were maybe 20, 30,000 students there. I spoke to them. My speech is very much online. It was a spontaneous speech about how important building love at this time, never resorting to violence, never resorting to hate, upholding the Constitution. That speech has been described as a hate speech for which I'm being charged. So please, at least critically as young people, please critically what you're told, just check it out. Then come to your conclusion. What is I? Why do I criticize uh, uh, my country so much? I criticize it because I love it so much. I wanted to, I don't want it to lose its way. There was a dream that we had for our country. We would be a country of love and respect for people of every religion and faith. We are losing our way. I will speak out against it. You charge me as under terror crimes, you charge me under money laundering, you put me in prison, I will still do it. Yeah. Sorry, full disclosure, I was invited by the Open Society Foundation. The largest philanthropy for human rights work in the world was the Human Rights Initiative, which is funded by George Soros. It funds Amnesty International, it funds Human Rights Watch, it funds a number of others. I was invited, I was first a member of their board, and then I was the chair of the advisory board of the Human Rights Initiative. I saw their work very closely.
Good afternoon, sir. So, when I read about you, I came to know that you were one of the persons who signed the mercy petition for Ajmal Kassim. Out of curiosity, I don't know whether this question is appropriate, but out of curiosity, I am asking, when there is hate spreading about him, you stood for him. So, what made you do that?
That's wonderful. Sorry, I was telling you the various things you'd find out about me if you looked at the other one of them. I'll tell you one or two more since one of them is that I signed uh, a petition saying I was opposed to the death penalty. I'm opposed to the death penalty generally, even of even of somebody like Ajmal Kasab who's caused us so much harm. But in the way that I was one of several hundred signatories, but in the way that when they try to construct you as an enemy, so this is put out, and since you picked it up, it's like it was my life's sort of central mission to ensure that Ajmal Kasab doesn't uh, hang. Uh, so yes, no, I'm opposed to the death penalty in principle, and I think you are called up, your beliefs are called upon most when you are most. So with somebody like Ajmal Kasab, do we believe that everybody know that we do not have the right to? Is the purpose of punishment retribution? Are we taking revenge? Or are we trying to deter uh, and uh, and so on? What is the purpose? Are we trying to reform? There's evidence from around the world that it's not the severity of punishment, but the certainty of punishment that deters. That many countries which have abolished the death penalty have not seen any particular rise in heinous crime because of it, and so on. So there's a long debate, which is a separate debate on why I'm opposed. So I oppose the death penalty to of Ajmal Kasab and Afzal Guru among many, among everybody else who seeks death penalty. I would oppose it for the Nirbhaya killers. I would oppose it for everybody, but that is the test. Let me tell you just a couple of stories, just at the human level. You have to make these choices. Um, in America, there was somebody, I think Gosmere, a couple. They had a teenage daughter. She fell in love with another teenage boy and started living together. One day, they got into a severe argument, and the teenage boy shot dead their daughter. The family was devastated, and the trial happened. And America, many states still have the death penalty. They were awarded the death penalty. A campaign started to, to not allow the boy to be hung. And the first applicants were the girl's parents. Right? Hmm? So it's an ethical question that we have to resolve among ourselves. I'll tell you a little another story. In Gujarat, one of the worst massacres was the Naroda Patia massacre, where largely women and children were killed in very large numbers. It was led by Maya Kotnani, who was a medical doctor, Minister of Women and Child Welfare in Mr. Modi's Gujarat cabinet. There was a very rare kind of judge of great integrity who was hearing the case, and she finally gave her sentence. I worked for many years in Gujarat with the survivors, and so the people whose loved one had been killed in the violence and were fighting this case. I remember they called me 2 or 3 days before and said that the ruling is finally going to come. And I was frightened for them. I said that if they still don't get justice, then they will be devastated. So I was telling them, be prepared. They said, no, this judge, we have great faith in, and she will give a correct judgment. When the judgment finally came, she actually gave a very strong, the highest punishment in independent India in communal violence. She gave Maya Kodani 28 years imprisonment, etc. It's another matter that 2014 happened that she came out on bail and now she's been completely acquitted. But what I was telling you that this young man, and he was a bus conductor, young bus conductor. His family had been killed in very badly during the riots, etc. He was telling me the story. He said, uh, I'll say it in English only. He said that when the judgment was announced, these men were then put into the van to be taken to prison, and their little children were running after the van, weeping away. And this young man tells me, he said, "Oh, at that time, my heart said enough. My heart said I should go to the judge and say, ma'am, thank you for giving this judgment. But when I see those little children crying, what is their fault? I'm reminded of our own children and what happened to them when they lost their fathers. So I wanted to tell her, the judge, forgive them." These are complex moral questions.
It's interesting that you bring it up now, because right now in Kerala there is a very sensational case of a girl killing her former boyfriend because she wants to marry somebody else. The court, Grishma, the court recently granted her capital punishment, and it seems the whole society is celebrating it. I think if I ask an opinion, may take an opinion poll here, I suppose most people will favor that judgment and that she should be hanged. This is actually taking a moral or an ethical position. But I, for one, do not approve of that capital punishment at all. This does not mean we are accepting or
Condoning the crime.
yeah, condoning what she did, but you're taking a position on this idea of capital punishment. Capital punishment is nothing but murder, revenge murder by the state.
And the fact that this young friend got this out of the internet, I just realized over and over again. I was in the IAS, as you know, and there was a WhatsApp group of my batchmates. I have a sort of fairly, in inverted commas, eminent set of batchmates that included Amitabh Kant, who was in the Shaktikant Das was the RBI governor, Sunil Arora was the chief election commissioner, and etc. All of them played many roles here. But I stayed with the batch WhatsApp group just for all time's sake. I used to look at the discourse. I was somewhat quite disturbed by the discourse. Then the Pulwama attacks happened, and the killing of all of those soldiers. One of my batchmates, who used to be Secretary Government of India at a very senior position, he wrote in the batch group that the person who opposed the death penalty of Afzal Guru should be put into a van, into a truck with his family, taken to Kashmir and blown up with a bomb. This is a senior IS officer who's also been a batchmate, and I thought a friend. I waited for a day or two to see if any of my batchmates spoke out against this. Not one. I then stepped down from that group. So the power of this kind of stereotyping is something that we have to recognize and also make choices, make informed choices. If you still feel that I should have been put into a truck with my family and taken to Kashmir and blown up with a bomb because I oppose the death penalty of Afzal Guru, if that's your choice, make a clear choice and then stand by it. Don't be swept away by the kind of propaganda that is put out.
Salam, Namaste, Comrade Harsh Mander. It's a great pleasure to interact with you this day. Sir, I agree with you. I myself, Shaheen, I agree with you when you said, when you blamed ourselves for electing people like Modi and Trump. But, sir, isn't there actually a problem with the conventional forms of democracy, also, especially in this new age, because the 35% of votes which Modi or Trump is getting is actually the 35% of the 60 or 65% of people who are voting. So do you think there is a problem with the conventional modes of democracy? And also there is a need to invent a new form of representative democracy? Thank you.
No, I definitely think in India in particular, I mean, they say that Trump this time did get a majority of the vote share. But in India, we find that Modi got 33% and then 38 point something percent, etc. Um, so the question of whether we should have proportional representation, I definitely think that we should reflect on proportional representation because what is the difference just for the younger people? We have what is now called the first past the post system. So suppose I'm standing in a constituency and I get 100 votes and you get 99. I get elected, you get 0. So the 99 becomes effectively like 0. And that 1% difference gives me power. But it doesn't mean that I have that much of support because you eliminate the 99% who voted against me. So the proportional representation system is one, and many countries have it, where you proportionate to the number of proportion of seats, a proportion of votes, you get a proportional number of seats. So it's something that we need to reflect on.
And just to add one more point to the benefit of the students here, majoritarianism is not the same as democracy. Most people mistake that just because somebody got more votes, that person has the right to do whatever he likes, or that everyone should listen to the majority opinion. That's majoritarianism. I think Sir also mentioned it during the course of his lecture. Democracy is different. Democracy is paying attention even to the one person who stands against or from the 99%, the opinion of the 99%. Gandhiji also famously said this. Yes, I think we just have time for one or two questions here.
Sir, we have a question from our online session.
So, sir, just you mentioned Gandhi, so I like a quote of his. He said, I obey only one dictator. And which is that dictator? Yeah, he said, the voice of my conscience. He was willing to be one person. I mean, at the time when he said India will not be a Hindu nation despite partition violence, etc., he was willing to stand alone and take the most unpopular positions. So that is one. And the second, which I mentioned earlier, that I think that if you see democracy as equivalent to the will of the majority, you are tending, I mean, you're on a pathway that can lead ultimately to fascism. So you have to recognize democracy as the defense of every minority. The weaker, the more powerless, the more firm and secure is their protection. That would be my yardstick for assessing the strength of a democracy. Sorry, please go.
Sir, we have a question from the online session by PJ Thomas of ESP College. The question is, Indian secularism is unconditional performance of identities with constitution as the only mediator as it is theoretically and ideally argued. But how do you reconcile the tension between the need to control or self-regulate many of these for peaceful coexistence and the desire and freedom to fully display and perform? Where do you draw the line? What's the role of the state and government in this? Is this unconditionality possible to slip into some sort of chaos or lawlessness? Is not this unconditionality misused by the mighty majority religion today? Does Indian secularism need to be reconceptualized in our times? If so, how?
Firstly, friend, what's the name of the person who sent this?
PJ Thomas.
Yeah. Thomas, you asked a very, very thoughtful question, and I need a lot more time to respond. Uh, but I'd like to sort of quickly answer by something that Baba Sahib Ambedkar said. Firstly, what are the four pillars of our constitution? Any of you? Any of my young people? What are the four pillars of the constitution? Yeah, good. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. Why are you so tentative? Yeah, by all means. Those are the four pillars: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. Okay, but this, so these words in English somehow don't resonate. I don't know Malayalam, but let me say in Hindustani. इंसाफ सबके लिए इंसाफ आज़ादी during the anti-CA protests, etc., Azadi was often raised. We already have freedom, so they said not freedom from the country, but freedom in the country. So, insaf, azadi, barabari, samanta, and the fourth was fraternity. Fraternity, का जो the literal meaning of fraternity is problematic. It means brotherhood. It's brotherhood because it leaves out sisterhood and the other genders. But the Hindi version of the constitution actually uses a very beautiful word, which is bandhuta. Bandhuta from Sanskrit, it actually means कि हम एक दूसरे से बंधे हुए हैं. You know, our religions may be different, our castes, our cultures, our way of life, language, everything may be different, but we are bound to and with each other. So if you suffer, if there are chains on your feet, I feel my freedom has been stolen away from me. That is really the idea that if Pelu Khan is beaten on his back, I feel the pain on my back. If a Dalit girl is gang raped and killed, I think of her as my sister or daughter. This is basically the idea of fraternity. Now, something very important, I'm responding briefly to Thomas's question. Baba Sahib Ambedkar said that it is possible to have justice, liberty, and equality without fraternity. But then justice, liberty, equality will have to be enforced by the power of the state. Okay? But if there is fraternity in society, if we really believe that injustice to you is injustice to me, your pain is my pain, that we must take care of each other, then Baba Sahib said, then you don't need the power of the state. Then liberty and equality and justice will become the natural order of things. Okay? So if there is within, if you ask me what the four pillars of the constitution, I'll tell you this. But if there's one idea which is the most foundational idea of our constitution, it is actually fraternity. It is bandhuta. And in simple words, it is love. Can we live together with love and respect? That is actually the core idea of our constitution. Now, the failure of what we are seeing today is the state is failing us by enforcing the values of the constitution, or the morality of the constitution. Yes. But society is failing us because we don't have fraternity with each other. So if something is happening to our Muslim brothers and sisters or our Dalit brothers and sisters, we don't care. So there is a failure of the state, but there's even more fundamentally a failure of us as people, are that it doesn't matter to us. When Bilkis Bano was her rapists and killers, were released and garlanded. And interestingly, on the on the 75th anniversary of India's freedom, this was the gift that happened on that day. Why did we not feel outraged? So, 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 so yes, there is a failure. The state is not adhering to, is actually in many ways profoundly opposed to the values of our constitution. We've elected a government of this kind. But as a society, we're also not reacting with care and with solidarity with people who are suffering in this.
I'm sorry, we are running out of time. We need to hold the valedictory ceremony immediately after this. So with your permission, can we wind up this session? Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, very fruitful session. Thank you all.
I would like to invite Mr. Premjit Emar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, to kindly come forward and present a memento as a token of our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed resource person, Mr. Harshman. So I would like to thank both our resource person and the mediator for this enriching session. As we draw this session to a close, I invite Jeevan to propose the word of thanks for this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's both an honor and a privilege to have this opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our speaker, Mr. Harsh Mander, for delivering a thought-provoking lecture. I would also like to thank our moderator, Associate Professor, Department of English, SB College, Mr. Josie Joseph, for leading the session. And also, I take this moment to thank our principal, vice principal, and other faculty members for their tireless efforts in ensuring the smoother execution of this event. Last but not the least, I would like to thank the entire organizing committee for their hard work and dedication. Once again, thank you.
As we have come to the end of the fourth plenary session, I request all the participants to seated for the valedictory session, which will begin in a short while.
Good afternoon, everyone. Respected dignitaries on and off the dais, esteemed faculty, honorable guests, and dear participants. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the valedictory function of the National Conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man and the Nation. As we come to the conclusion of 3-day conference, we take this moment to reflect on the intellectual journey we have been all part of. Through various sessions, we have celebrated the legacy of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, delving into his vision of India and the ideal he cherished: secularism, democracy, and nation building. To begin, it's my privilege to invite Dr. Suma Alexander, head of the Department of English, to deliver the welcome address.
Good afternoon, everyone. Respected Principal, Dr. Matthew Abraham, coordinators of this conference, Mr. Amit David, Mr. Premjit Emma, assistant professors of the department, our Vice Principal, Dr. Anne Abraham, our distinguished guest speakers who are present for the valedictory, Mr. Harsh Mander and Mr. Ajoy Ashirwad, the most resourceful moderators, Professor Dr. Josie Joseph, Dr. Hari Krishnan, our former student Shahin, and all my colleagues, delegates, participants, dear students. As we reach the concluding session of our conference, it has been, let me tell you that it has been an immense privilege on the part of the Department of English to conduct this conference in the best possible manner. And we had a host of the best speakers available on the topic. And we are deeply indebted for sharing their insights on Jawaharlal Nehru, man, idea, and nation. A quick glance at the program, at the sessions. Jawaharlal Nehru, his role as a visionary in shaping the future of India. Then his idea of an inclusive India, including ideas of secularism and emphasizing the pluralism. And then we had the post-Nehruvian era, and then the challenges that are faced by modern India, and some solutions for the future course of action in my own simple words. And we are sure that all the different participants have different takeaways from the seminar. It catered to the needs of the scholars, the researchers, our college students, each and everyone present here. Thank you on behalf of the department to our resource persons for enriching our knowledge and experience, sharing your expertise and your wide range of experience, drifting across topics, across countries. And it was really an enriching experience for all of us. So let me move on to my duty, that is welcoming the gathering. Our principal, Dr. Matthew Abraham, though he has so many other official duties, was here for the inaugural address and also now for the valedictory address. On behalf of the department, I welcome Dr. Matthew Abraham to this program. And then the coordinators, Mr. Amit David and Premjit Emma. It has been an accomplishment, we have to say, in bringing together these experts in one stage to share their wonderful thoughts on the topic. Now, let me, I was really impressed. I just missed Ajoy Ashura's speech, but then very impressed by the gentle but very strong message that Harsh Mander sir had to convey. It is a really relevant message that we all should share and spread. Let us all be torch bearers of love and compassion, love and compassion and maybe peaceful coexistence. And then to all my dear students, I know that you all had a wonderful experience as members of different organizing, different committees, working together with your teachers. And may you all benefit from the wealth of experience that you have gained from this program. And then to all the participants, delegates, for making, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And then I welcome you all to this session, for making this session a very fruitful one. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now it's my honor to invite Professor Dr. Ranjit Matthew Abraham, Principal of Bishopmoor College, to deliver the valedictory address.
Respected head of the department, Dr. Suma Alexander, the conveners of this program, Mr. Amit David and Mr. Ranjit, delegates, resource persons, dignitaries, students, and those who are listening to this program through the online mode. I am immensely honored to be here this afternoon because earlier I was invited to deliver the inaugural address, and today I am again given the responsibility of delivering the valedictory address also. As far as Bishopmoor College is concerned, this year is a very auspicious year because our institution is celebrating its diamond jubilee. It's celebrating its 60th year of existence. And to commemorate the diamond jubilee of the college, I am immensely happy, and I also take this opportunity to thank the Department of English under the leadership of Dr. Suma Alexander and the conveners of this program, Mr. Premjit and Mr. Amit David, for taking the initiative, a very concerted effort for organizing a national seminar on Jawaharlal Nehru, a man, idea, and the nation. I think there is no need for a detailed valedictory address because very eminent personalities have been interacting with you for the past 3 days. We've had very thought-provoking sessions for the past 3 days. I think very important aspects of Indian democracy, secularism, very burning issues have been discussed here. And I am sure that all those who participated in this program have been very deeply enriched. I think you will have a lot of intellectual enrichment that you will be able to carry home after participating in this program. As far as India is concerned, India is a land of diversity. It is a land of different castes, different religions, different vernaculars, so languages. So, given this context, I think this seminar has been really, really relevant because the first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, I think he laid the foundation for our country. And if our country should exist, the principles of secularism, democracy, inclusiveness, all these, I think he was a very profound proponent of all these vital things that our country require if it has to continue. I think today, when India became independent, I think even in the inaugural address, I was telling that during the time of partition, it was a great challenge because India was going to be divided on the basis of its religion. And imagine what is the task of dividing a big country like India in the subcontinent into two countries based on its religion. And bringing about the partition was such a colossal task. And Jawaharlal Nehru, he was entrusted with the responsibility of implementing all these things. And I think his role as the first Prime Minister of India was very vital in building our country. I once again appreciate and congratulate the Department of English for organizing this seminar, and I wish all the participants all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I invite Mr. Premjit Emma, Assistant Professor, the Department of English, and the convener of the conference to propose the vote of thanks.
Respected dignitaries on and of the dais, friends, my apologies in advance as there is every likelihood that I exceed the time allotted to me for vote of thanks. The answer to the question why Nehru was chosen as the conference theme is that Nehru embodies the spirit of resistance in his personal and public persona. Placed in this context, the conference on Nehru is a collective response to an ideology which normalized and institutionalized hatred, and also to the enforced fear and silencing of voices of reason and dissent in academics. The conference attempts to put up a strong resistance to the concerted efforts of certain agencies to undermine and thus phase out humanities from academic firmament, effectively neutralizing critical thinking, resistance, dissent, empathy, and humanism from public imagination. Education is hollowed out from within, being stripped of its ethical, moral, and humanistic aspects by overlaying emphasis on skills. Through this conference, we register our protest against the state government's policies aimed to break a well-placed system of which they were once the beneficiaries. Their wishful thinking is that since we have achieved European standards in all developmental indices, why do we stop short in higher education? We look for American and European universities for clues. Thus, we have FIUGP, DPEP, CBCSS, etc., thrusted upon us from a top. We have a government-sponsored think tank named Kerala State Higher Education Council, KSHEC, a care home for retired professors and an asylum for ideological stormtroopers of the ruling party. Organizing higher education conclave in every 3 months in five-star hotels to tell the laity that we have no funds. We would also like to place this conference as a protest against certain higher education institutions' paranoid obsession with NAC and NIRF over student-centric teaching learning process. The conference attempts to draw the immediate attentions of those who care for the grand old party in India, which Nehru helped to institute for its apathy and complete lack of directions. When I approached the Member of Parliament of Alappuzha, who is a political heavyweight in the national scheme of things in the Congress party, for support, he bluntly told me that the conference happens not in his constituency. Then I realized that Nehru belonged to Mahavira. The conference also aimed to initiate a debate on the reimagination and the emergence of a new political narrative in India based on empathy, civility, education, deep sense of history, then practical wisdom, etc., the values Nehru embodied and stood for. Most importantly, the conference was aimed to bridge the gap between students and faculty after the pandemic caused disruptions in academia. Recently, we all felt then a kind of alienation and a fear of extinction, but the conference reassured ourselves and the students that the humanities will be here to stay. With this, I come to my duty to say a vote of thanks. Many well-meaning individuals have supported our conference. I express my deepest sense of gratitude and appreciation to Mr. Siddharth Varadarajan, the founder editor of The Wire, Mr. Akar Patel, Mr. Mukul Keshavan, Mr. Ajoy Ashirwad, and Mr. Harsh Mander, Principal Ranjit Sir, my colleagues, Ms. Sabida Ma'am, Chief Manager, Canara Bank, student conveners, Sandra, Shreya, and Abel. My dear students, all glory to you and more power to you. Caterers, non-teaching staff, photographers, to name few for their enormous support and contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we obviously bring the National Conference on Jawaharlal Nehru, Man, Idea and Nation to a close. Over 3 days, we have explored Nehru's profound impact on the nation, his visionary ideals, and his enduring legacy. Let us carry forward to the lesson and insight gained during this conference as we continue to unfold the principle Nehru stood for. A sincere thank you to the Department of English, our sponsors and partners. And a big thank you to the technical teams, event staffs, and volunteers for their tireless efforts in planning and executing this session so seamlessly. Your dedication behind the scene has been the backbone of today's success. To all the participants and attendees, thank you for your active and encouragement and enthusiasm. Thank you.
So it's with deep gratitude that we think of Harsh Mander. He has contributed some books to our library. I would request Mander to hand over the books to our head of the department.
Lunch is now being served in the auditorium. Please feel free to head over and enjoy the delicious meals. Once again,